Okay. All right. Parshat Vayera, 5782. Quick summary of the Parsha. We like to do that first. The Parsha begins where last week's Parsha left off. Last week's Parsha ended with the Brit Milah of Avraham. At the beginning of this week's Parsha, we find Avraham outside his tent. On the third day after the Brit Milah, Rashi tells us the hardest day to be out there. Hashem makes it even harder and hotter by taking out the sun from its sheath. It's super hot. There's no Hashem disposes of the ozone layer, and the sun is beaming directly onto Avraham, and still Avraham is outside his tent, hoping to find some nomads to bring into his house. Some people visit, they give him a blessing, and that blessing is that he will have a child. And they also, immediately after that, they go and they fulfill their job of destroying the city of Sodom. Avraham prays for the Sodom not to be destroyed. He's such a tzaddik, he's so righteous that he can't imagine that somebody is so evil that they deserve to be destroyed. He prays and prays, hoping that they would be saved. And eventually, a few people are saved. Happens to be it's Avraham's relative, Lot, and his family were supposed to be saved. His daughters, his sons-in-law, and his wife. However, his sons-in-law made a mockery of him. They didn't trust that he would be saved. They didn't trust that it was going on at all. And they died together with the city. And the wife of Lot turned back famously and turned into a pillar of salt. Lot's daughters, thinking that the world is basically over, they seduce their father and create eventually the progeny are the nations of Ammon and Moab. And that's how that happened. The end of the Parsha, there's a few other details, of course, worthy of mention, but the final event of the Parsha, really, the final. The main test, we call it the main test of Avraham, whether it was or not, we'll see hopefully today when we get into greater detail. But the great test of the akeida, we mention it during Rosh Hashanah. It's such an important event. It's when Avraham was told to bring Yitzchak up to the mountain, which he interpreted to mean that he was supposed to sacrifice Yitzchak. He was about to sacrifice him. The angel says, don't. And it seems like Hashem changed his mind. There's a lot to talk about in that whole episode. We could probably very easily have a series of classes on that event all by itself without the rest of the Parsha. But we unfortunately don't have time for that quite yet. And so we'll get to that particular part of the Parsha when we get to it, which basically means at the end of the class, God willing. So let's start off at the beginning. We're going to do a deep dive into the Parsha now, verse by verse. Obviously, not every verse. Next week's Parsha would be even a little easier to do every verse. It's a much shorter Parsha, but even there, we're not going to do every verse because we're not just reading verses here. We want to understand them. All right, so the Parsha begins. The Parsha begins with, as I said before, Vayar Elav Hashem Belanei Mamre. Hashem was seen to Avraham, made himself seen to Avraham, made himself visible, whatever that means. Belanei Mamre, in this place, the valley of Mamre. V'hu Yosef Petach HaOhel Kichom Hayom, and he was sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day. Kichom, really the hottest part of the day. He saw Einav, he lifted up his eyes, Vayar, and he saw V'hine Shlosha Anashim Nitzavim Alav. There's three people coming towards him. Vayar, Vayaras, the Kratav, he saw them and he ran after them. We have Vayar, by the way, if you've been counting, this is the third time we've had this word, that with the root word being to see. So Hashem made himself seen to Avraham. And even though he made himself seen to Avraham, Avraham basically hung up the phone on this conversation with God, and instead ran after these three nomads to make sure that they would be his guests. He saw them, He ran after them, Vayaretz Likartam, Vipetach HaOhel, Vishtachu Arza, and he bowed down to the ground. He's very, very eager to have them as guests. So we're going to have basically two questions on these verses. There's probably more that we could discuss, as I was sort of implying. But first question we're going to ask is, why does Hashem visit Avraham after the circumcision? Now, by the way, just quickly, we're not going to look at the Rashi inside, but Rashi says that Hashem is visiting Avraham because Hashem wants to teach us this very important mitzvah we have of Bikur Cholim. We have a mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, and Hashem wants to show that even Hashem does Bikur Cholim. Even Hashem visits the sick to teach us that we should visit the sick. Now, by the way, just an aside, really, this isn't the source of the mitzvah, right? There's if you look in Shulchan Aruch to find out what the source of the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim is, it isn't Hashem visited Avraham, so you have to visit sick people too. That's not how it works. There's a lot of things Hashem does. It's not a mitzvah for us to do them. We don't have a mitzvah to create the world, right? There can't be such a mitzvah. We have pruvu, but that's as close as it gets. There's no way we're gonna, say the word tree and a tree will appear. There's no mitzvah like that. So what is this teaching us? That Hashem visited the sick. What's going on here? Why is he visiting him here now? And this isn't the first time Avraham was sick. Probably this is not the first time anybody was hurt. Hashem. It doesn't say Vayar Hashem Noach after the flood. Right. So what's going on? Why is Hashem so eager, seemingly to be visible, to be seen by Avraham? So that's one question. And the next question is, who are these visitors? Now, again, it's worth mentioning. It seems from the verse they're just anashim, they're just nomads. And there are commentaries who explain it that way. And this is an important explanation to explain something we're going to see later on from the Khatam Sofer about Sarah's laughing, which we'll get to in a few moments. But Rashi, we'll see, says that these nomads weren't just regular people. They were something special, as we'll see. And in fact, this is one of those types of, one of those interesting situations that a lot of people imagine that that's exactly what happened, as explained in the Torah, not the Midrash, in the Torah. So when people think of this incident where Avraham is sitting at the tent and he's visited by these three visitors, they imagine immediately that they are what Rashi says they were, and not what the Pashut Pshat is. He says Shlosha Anashim. It says 3 people. So let's get back to the first question. First question first. Why does Hashem visit Avraham? So we're going to look at the Malbim. We haven't looked at the Malbim in a long time. I've missed him. But so he says, you have to understand that this visit to Avraham has a lot to do with what just happened to Avraham. What just happened to Avraham? He had a Brit Milah. So what he had a Brit Milah? So what changed? What changed? Says the Malbim, what changed is now Avraham is going to have a higher degree of prophecy. The Brit Milah, symbolically, is the removal of a physical impediment, the orla, in order to allow a greater spiritual awakening. And that's exactly what Avraham had. How do you see Avraham's spiritual awakening? It's a higher level of nevuah. He's a much stronger prophet than he used to be. And the Malbim goes deep into the words of the verse, like he usually does, to show you how each and every single aspect of the verse points this out. So let's look at it in some detail. So first of all, he says, Vayera alav, Hashem became seen to him. When have you ever seen that kind of language being used before? It's not just that Hashem allowed himself to be seen, but Avraham was on the level to be able to see Hashem on this higher level that never existed before. He's the first person. He's the first person to create a Brit Milah, and he's the first person to have this vision. It's not a coincidence. This vision happened because he has a Brit Milah. He's on this higher level now. Furthermore, this prophecy is what is. Let's go back into the words of the verse. Vayar ilav Hashem belonei mamre. Why is it important that it was in belonei mamre? This place is not a particularly amazing spot. This isn't Har HaMoriah. This isn't Har Sinai. It's just a place, just a random place. The randomness of it shows that Hashem became seen even in this place. Even in this place, even in this random place that is not particularly a place of sanctity, right? So it's not any of the places that Avraham previously built, any of his altars. It's just a regular place, and even there he has prophecy, which means he's so much stronger of a Navi than he used to be. Then he continues and says, what's the next part? V'hu Yoshev, he was sitting. Why is that important? Because never do you have a prophet who could just sit back and relax and get prophecy until now. Up until now, all Nevi'im had their nevuah in a dream, in some sort of fit and some sort of trance. And now here's Avraham sitting back, relaxing. Okay, because he's probably still in pain, but he's sitting anyway. Right? He's in a sitting position. He's in a comfortable position, and that's when he gets his prophecy. He doesn't have to like work himself up into a frenzy or anything like that. So that's one thing. It's three things. Okay. So again, Hashem made himself visible to Avraham. That's one proof that this is a greater prophecy. This happens in Elonei Mamre. That's the second proof that it's a random place, and even there he gets the prophecy. Hu Yoshev, he's sitting. Not a big deal. Where is he sitting? Petach HaOhel, at the entrance of the house. Just like many other individuals, they have to basically like disturb their comfort zone. They have to get into this, this meditative concentration. He was able to get to that level of prophecy just by being at the entrance of his tent. He didn't have to like seclude himself in the tent. He could be outside the tent. Right. So again, fourth reason now that we see that he has a unique prophecy. It's Kechom Hayom. It's the super hot day. It's uncomfortable. Just between you and me and however many other thousands of people see this video in the future, it was hot on Yom Kippur. It was hard to daven. It was difficult. It's distracting.
With masks.
What?
No, I'm just saying, like even that, like masks.
Masks. Yeah, there are all kinds of distractions. And here's Avraham getting prophecy, seeing Hashem, the greatest kind of prophecy, the greatest, most powerful davening, and it's super hot around him. It's hundreds of degrees, perhaps. Right? There's no protection. There's no environmental protection agency here. It's super hot. The sun's rays are beaming down on Avraham, and here he is seeing Hashem anyway. That's how great of a prophet he became. And right after this happens, what's the next verse start off with? After God appears to him, he is able to right after that, lift his eyes and see these three men coming. And of course, we know, as Rashi is going to tell us, that these weren't just regular men, that these were angels. Usually what happens, as the Malbim points out, what happens is first they see an angel, and then they move their way up to seeing Hashem, right, or experiencing some sort of godliness. Avraham is pumfaker, the exact opposite of how that happens, right? He turned that around. He sees Hashem first, and then he visits. Then he has visitors of these angels. So it's completely new kind of prophecy, a new breed of prophecy, all because of this new mitzvah of Brit Milah. So that's what the Malbim says, and that's the whole purpose of this visit, is to teach us not just how important it is to visit the sick, says the Malbim, but also to teach us what an amazing prophet Avraham now became because of this mitzvah. And by the way, he doesn't really say this, but it's worth mentioning that it's actually a very well-known thing. At least in my yeshiva, there was talk about people who came to the yeshiva, and it's about teshuva yeshiva that I went to, or Sameach Mansi should be remembered for good, and about teshuva yeshiva, and a lot of people came in and not knowing very much Torah, and some people took the Torah immediately and were able to fly high, and after a month they're already learning on the same level as people in the bigger yeshivas. And some people just took a long time. They just couldn't get it. They had questions and they couldn't remember things, and it wasn't an intelligence thing. They were intelligent guys. So what was it? So they did some research and found out that these guys, when they had their Brit Milah, they had a Brit Milah that was a different sect of Judaism or something like that. They had their Brit Milah from a doctor instead of a moel, right? All kinds of different things. If it's not a pure, complete, kosher Brit Milah, the Torah doesn't flow quite as easily. It's an important concept we see right here in the Malbim, but it's true for us as well. Okay, so as we said before, these three people, who were they? Hine shlosha anashim, echa levasa et Sara. One came to basically inform Sara of her pregnancy. Ve'echa lehafoch et Sodom. One came to overturn Sodom. Lirapot et Avraham, and one came to heal Avraham. So we have three people with these very amazing goals, and then Rashi explains she'ein malach echad osa shtei shlichiyut. So there's no such thing as an angel who does multiple jobs. Each angel has one assigned task, and here you have three angels. One angel has the job of informing Sara, or basically giving her the blessing that would eventually allow her to become pregnant. One came to overturn Sodom, and one came to heal Avraham. There isn't any one of them who came to do all three of those things. Okay, so what am I trying to get to? Right, so his proof that these are angels is the fact that it's talking in plural the whole time. There weren't any one individual person, any one individual angel. These are three people, or three angels, as he explains, that all had these important jobs to do. So he's quoting the Bereshit Rabbah. So just in case we need proof for Rashi, right? It's important, by the way, to know that, as I mentioned before, that not everybody agrees with Rashi. The Pashut Pshat, just looking at the verse itself without Rashi. So Rashi said, by the way, just so you know, Rashi is saying that this is the Pashut Pshat. These are angels. Why is that Pashut Pshat? Because like we just said, everything's written in the plural. There's no such thing as three human beings who are going to, like robots, going to do the exact same thing at the exact same time. And then they ate, and then they got up, and then that's not how it works, right? One guy's going to sit down and eat. I just served dinner an hour ago. I can tell you, you make dinner, you call one kid, you call another kid. One kid comes down, the other one's playing around. But eventually, the other one comes to the table. The first one goes to the bathroom. Right? So to have all three people sit down at the exact same time is nothing short of a miracle. And so here you have these angels are doing everything exactly together the whole time, the whole way through. So obviously these aren't regular people, says Rashi. That's the proof that these are indeed angels, as the Midrash tells us. So that's the Pashut Pshat. That's the simple explanation, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. So interestingly enough, Chomat Anoch, that's the Chidah, one of his books on the Parsha, he points out, I have the whole piece here, but really all we need really here is the last few words. Katav Rabbeinu Mara Migarmiza, Rabbi Eliezer of Garmiza writes, Zeloshono, Hine Shlosha, those two words, Hine Shlosha, and those three is the exact gematria of Elu, Michael, Gavriel, Raphael. These are Michael, Gavriel, and Raphael. Those are the names of the three angels that the Midrash says came to Avraham. Just so you know, All three of these have particular jobs, usually, and it's usually hinted at by their names, right? Michael is the angel that's very involved in human affairs, especially when it comes to the continuation of the Jewish people. So obviously he's the one who gives Sara the bracha that helps her eventually become pregnant and have Yitzchak a year later. Gavriel, from the word gavar, gever, strong. So it's his job usually to do acts of war or violence or punishment when necessary. So it's his job to overturn Sodom. And of course, Rifael, from the word rifua, Rafa, means he heals. That's what he does. So his job is to heal Avraham. So it fits in perfectly. The Gematria fits in perfectly. So you have beautiful code right there in the Torah to prove what Rashi is saying, that these are these three angels. Okay. So we're going to skip about 10 psukim now to Sarah's laughter. Very, very interesting incident, I would say. It's there's so okay. Thank you. So there's so many different explanations to what happened and why it happened. We'll try to understand it in the opinion of the Khatam Sofer. So let's see what it says. It says here, but Yitzchak Sara, by the way, obviously the word tzachak is in there, which means laughter, which is eventually going to be her child's name, Yitzchak. But Yitzchak Sara b'kirba, she laughed within herself, Lamor, or she laughed about her insides, saying, Acharei beloti hayta li edna v'adoni zakein. This is going to, so she just heard the blessing that she's going to be a mother a year from this date, whatever this date is. By the way, Chazal tells us it was Pesach, right? The first night of Pesach. So it was a busy day for them, as could be expected.
Were they eating matzah, or was it before or after?
It's very interesting. You bring it up. It's one of the reasons that one of the proofs Chazal say that this is Pesach is that when the angels come to Sodom and they meet Lot, what does Lot say to them? Come to my house and I will give you matzah. Right? So either he was eating matzah just stam randomly, which I guess can happen if you like matzah enough, or it's an interesting hint to the fact that it was Pesach time. Now you're going to ask, wait a minute, the Jewish people weren't rescued from Mitzrayim yet. Why are they celebrating Pesach? And the answer is, we've mentioned this answer in other contexts. The Sefer Yetzirah tells us that every season of the year has its own special power. The season of Pesach, the season of Nisan, has the power to liberate people. Before the liberation ever happened, it was a natural event that it happened in Nisan, because Nisan is the time of our freedom. It is Zman Chiratenu even before we were slaves in Egypt. So even then, people celebrated that particular season by eating that particular food. All right. Anyway, we're getting a little deeper here than I intended. Okay, so let's go on. Vayera Hashem el Avraham. So this is still Sara just laughed. She heard the blessing. She laughed. She said, "I'm too old to have children. My husband is an old man already." Vayera Hashem el Avraham. Why is it that Sarah laughed? Lamor is saying, how can I have children if I'm already old? See, he left out the part about how she said that Avraham was old. Rashi tells us this is another example of how Hashem is teaching us how to behave, and it's not to speak lashon hara when not necessary, not to even bend the truth a little bit for the purposes of peace in the home. Where if Hashem would have told Avraham exactly what Sarah said, it would have made Avraham feel a little bit sad. And by the way, he was 100 years old, so he knew he was old, right? It shouldn't have been like, oh, she called me old. How dare she? He wasn't, he wasn't 40 years old or something. He was 100 years old by this time, and it makes a lot of sense. And still, even nevertheless, a little bit of sadness is not worth it to say the whole truth if the truth is not completely necessary. All right. So Hashem complains to Avraham that Sarah laughed. And by the way, why is Hashem even telling this to Avraham at all? Why isn't that lashon hara? So the simple explanation is, what goes on in a man's house is somewhat that man's responsibility. He has to correct the mistakes that are happening in his home, and if indeed Sarah did the wrong thing by laughing here, Avraham has to fix it. So exactly, this is nothing's too amazing for Hashem. At this time next year, this season, you will have a son. And Sarah was lied. I don't know how else to translate techachesh. Sarah lemor, she said, and she lied, and she said, lo tzachakti, I didn't laugh. Torah says she laughed. So there you go. Why? Ki yareya, she was afraid. Veyomer lo ki tzachakti, and he said, no, you laughed. Yeah, come on, you laughed. Don't try to hide it. So what was she afraid of? So there are, like I said, a million explanations to this entire very strange incident. But Rav Hirsch tells us she was afraid of embarrassing the guests. Right? That's why she said, I didn't laugh, because she didn't want the guests to know that she either thought the prophecy was bogus or whatever it is she thought when she laughed. Now, what did she think when she laughed? Why did she laugh? What was her explanation? Yes, it's this is going to be hard. This explanation, by the way, just to give you a heads up, spoiler alert, this explanation is going to make it difficult to understand why Avraham had to correct her, because this explanation makes it sound like she should have laughed. It was the right thing to do.
I don't know. I also, just like what you said beforehand, it was kind of, I don't know, it sounds a little funny to rebuke someone in front of people.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
That always like gets me, I don't know. It's embarrassing.
It's very embarrassing, and it should be avoided at all costs. Why it happened in this particular incident depends on what exactly is happening. So let's see what's happening. Yeah. So first of all, to understand this incident a little bit better, we need to know something that happened in previous parsha. The parsha right before this one, in Lech Lecha at the end, Hashem asks Avraham to make a brit milah, but he also gives him a promise. What's the promise? That he's going to have a child. He's going to have a son, and he should name him Yitzchak. And what does Avraham do in response? Tzachak. He laughs. He also laughs. So Avraham laughs, and his son's name should be laughter. And then Sara laughs, and she's rebuked for laughing. And what's going on here? So says the Chatam Sofer, a very important idea. We know, like I said, that Hashem already promised to Avraham that he would have a child. So the promise was already good. The bracha already existed. And the laughter that Avraham laughed was a laughter of joy. He's so happy that he's going to have a child. What do you think any ordinary person or even extraordinary person like Avraham would do at this point? Tell us why. Right? He just got a bracha from Hashem that he's going to have a child. What should he do? He should run home and say, honey, we're going to have a child. Hashem just told me. Says the Chatam Sofer, that's exactly what happened. He told Sara that Hashem told him this prophecy that he would have a child. Then come along these three nomads. And like I said, it's important to remember to distinguish what Rashi says from what is actually in the text. In the text, it's just nomads. Whether Avraham knew that they were angels, whether other people around are so used to angels, they know what an angel looks like. That's a whole complicated issue. Sara did not know that these were angels. And so when she hears this blessing, basically from not just a nomad, but an Ovid Avodah Zorah, a worshiper of idols, right? Avraham had to have them wash their hands and feet because the dust that they worshipped was on them. That's what they thought. So this Ovid Avodah Zorah says this blessing that Hashem should give you a child a year from now. What's going on in Sarah's mind? In Sarah's mind, she knows Hashem gave her a blessing, and now that blessing might get interrupted by this tameh, this impure blessing that she's getting from this terrible person. I don't know, terrible person, but this definitely somebody whose blessing we don't want. We don't want the blessings of somebody who's Ovid of Avodah Zarah. We have, in fact, the very, very beginning of the whole Masechta Avodah Zarah. The very, very first Mishnah in Avodah Zarah is not to do business with Gentiles right before their holiday, because what are they going to do when their holiday rolls around? They're going to thank you. They're going to thank God, their God, for you. They're going to say, "Oh, thanks, gods, for doing business with, for letting me meet this wonderful Jew." Right? And he's going to bless you with his God. He's going to say, may my gods bless you. And stuff like that's. We don't want any kind of involvement with that, with their holidays. So no business with Gentiles at that point. What the halakha is, I'm not going to get into right now. You're already wondering, can we sell them turkeys on Thanksgiving? Can we sell them toys on Xmas? I don't know. That's not discussion right now. There's not a halakha class. The idea is sound. I want you to understand the idea that the blessings of somebody who worships idols is not a blessing for us. It's considered like a curse. It can, in fact, according to the way Sara understands this, according again to the opinion of the Khatam Sofer, the way Sara understands this is this blessing from this worshiper of idols might cause Hashem's blessing to veer off and not be established. Because what would happen, by the way, practically speaking, what's going to happen if she gets pregnant now and has a child exactly when this idol worshiper says it's going to happen? This idol worshiper and anybody else in her household who heard him are going to think that it was because of his blessing. His God did it. Let's bring sacrifices to the rock god, because his blessing made it so that Sarah finally became pregnant. God's blessing didn't work because she wasn't pregnant for years and years. They've been trying and trying. They've been in Eretz Israel for over 10 years already, and they still haven't gotten pregnant. What do you do? So to avoid that, to make sure we make a Kiddush Hashem, Sarah laughed, and she wanted her laughter to have the same effect as Yaakov's laughter did when he was told about Yosef's dream. Now I know I'm going a little bit ahead now to a parsha quite a few weeks from now, but we're going to have the story of Yaakov and Yosef and his 12 brothers. And Yosef's brothers are upset about Yosef's dream. He sounds like he wants to be in charge of them. And Yaakov basically tones it down. He's like, don't worry about it. How could you think me and my wife are going to bow down to you? That's impossible. Your mother's dead. That's not going to happen. So he kind of laughs it off. But what does the Torah tell us? He kept it in mind. He realized that there was some truth to this dream. He laughed it off because he didn't want for other people around to take it too seriously. So Sarah laughed for the same reason. She didn't want people to take this blessing too seriously. And that's the by the way, for those of you who've ever had strange blessings, that is an acceptable thing to do, by the way. It's like I have a friend, or an acquaintance, I should say, who when she was younger and she went to weddings and she was single, guys would come up to her, older men really, would come up to her and give her a blessing that she should have a football team full of boys in her house. as her children. She wasn't married yet, right? She's like, I don't even want a football team. I don't want that many boys. Who wants that many boys? It's destroying the house without, I want boys, I want girls. I don't know what I want yet. I definitely don't want this blessing. So she asked the Rav what she can do about these kinds of weird blessings she gets from people. And the answer is exactly this. You can just laugh it off. You don't have to take these blessings seriously. You don't have to say amen and be like, oh, be all like meditative about it. It's don't take it too seriously. It's just crazy old men saying crazy old things. All right. Take that for what it's worth.
Remember when I had up here there after your class on Shabbat?
Yeah.
We were walking home and there was this lady who was like a Messianic too.
Oh, great.
So we weren't sure who she was. We thought she was just, she started giving us the bracha. We were like, oh, this is interesting. And then in the end, she said like Jesus' name. We're like, oh,
yeah. Well, that was the end of that one. It was a nice blessing until good old Jesus came up and got involved. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm thinking of a joke, but this is not the right time for it. Maybe I'll tell you later. So she says, So she says I didn't laugh. She did laugh, and so that's that. Okay. We're going to skip along a little bit, about 8 more verses, and we're going to get to the part where Hashem informs Avraham about Sodom. And we're going to have a beautiful essay from the Mora, from Nechama Leibowitz, explaining why Sodom deserved to be destroyed. It's not so simple. It's not immediately obvious. Anyway, Vayomer Hashem, Zakat Sodom v'Amorah ki rabah lechat Hashem. This is chapter 18, verse 20 and 21. By the way, I haven't been saying the verses lately. I apologize. Hashem said let's call it the outrage. That's what Sefaria calls it. The screaming out of Sodom and Amorah has become great. V'chatatam ki chavda ma'od, and their sinning is very great. Adrona ve'era, I will go down now and see. Haktsakata, her screaming. Her sounds like we're talking about the city. And if they and when their screaming has reached me, I'm going to take note to see if they're going to change. All right. So says Nechama Leibowitz in her series of essays. The Sin of Sodom is the name of this chapter. She quotes these verses. And then she says, paying attention to the original Hebrew wording, it is not easy to determine to what haktsakatha, the cry of it, literally of her, refers to. Being feminine, the only previous noun in the feminine gender is Sodom and Amorah. It's because it's called the ear. Ear is feminine, and this, which means city. And this indeed is the interpretation followed by most commentaries as constituting the plain sense of the text. However, our sages in the Midrash were not satisfied with this and attributed the feminine reference to the cry of that young woman, Ota Riva. Here we shall quote the relevant Midrash, Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, number 27, tells the whole story. Basically, there was a woman, a young girl, who saw a poor man, and she felt sorry for him. So even though it was against the law, she took care of him. And the men of Sodom found out about it, and they basically strung her up and allowed her to be basically killed by the elements, burnt perhaps, burnt by fire. I think it says in the Midrash here. Anyway, whatever the case may be, that's how terrible they were. By the way, an aside, completely unrelated perhaps to this class, I have a personal story in my family of a very similar incident. My biological paternal grandmother, my father's biological mother, So she was imprisoned in Russia for a short time, or maybe a long time. I wasn't there. I don't know exactly. But she was imprisoned. And why was she imprisoned? She was in charge of a store in the 1950s when a certain group of poor people came down and asked for a certain amount of flour, which is more than they were allowed to have. There's certain limits to how much flour they could have because of rationing and things like that. God forbid we should ever know of such things. People in Venezuela know what I'm talking about. Right. So there was all kinds of rationing going on. And she looked around, nobody was there. So she gave them more than she asked, more than they were allowed, because she figured they're going back. They looked like they were coming from the small cities, from the mountains, whatever they're called, the Hicks, basically. So she gave them more than she was supposed to. And it turned out that these were informants. They were undercover to see if people would give them more than they were supposed to get. And they had her arrested for what? For being generous, for giving more than she was supposed to. So that's exactly what Sodom was like. Even worse, I mean, she didn't, Baruch Hashem, she wasn't killed for this, but Russian prison isn't so much better than death, to tell you the truth. You're surrounded in a cell with, with 20, 30 other people, some of them hardened criminals, and you have like one little pot in the middle of the room for you to use for private things, and that's it. That's your life for a few years. So not pleasant. If you think only the decent citizens were rationed, trust me, the prisoners were rationed even more. So yeah, the Midrash wishes to emphasize 2 points. What's the point of this Midrash? First, what exactly constituted the wickedness of Sodom? What form had such wickedness to take to warrant the total destruction of the city? Keep in mind, just like the story I just told you, Moscow wasn't destroyed after this happened to my grandmother. Right? These kinds of things don't happen usually for this kind of bad behavior. So there must be something deeper going on that deserves for the entire city, all of Sodom, to be completely wiped out. Which, by the way, as far as I know, there's some archaeological evidence for that Sodom existed and Sodom was destroyed in an instant, more or less. By the way, not going to go there right now. The answer given by the Midrash to this question is social iniquity, even of a passive and not an active form. The prophet Ezekiel describes Sodom crimes in this very manner when he says, "Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy." So, in other words, having a lot and being so stingy with that lot that, speaking of lot, that they're not giving anything to the poor. But the height of their wickedness lay not in the activities of the individual transgressors, but in the fact that such iniquitous behavior was clothed with a cloak of legality, raised to the level of a social norm, as our Midrash seeks to underline. In other words, they had a proclamation. They made a rule: don't give bread to the poor. That was the law. It wasn't just like people didn't like to do it. You go to certain neighborhoods in San Diego, you go to certain neighborhoods in any city, and you'll find people who are there's a culture of people who don't want to give, people don't want to house people don't want to take action and help. Okay, so that's a culture, but to make a law like that, to then have punishments for people who don't follow this law, that's a different level. So their wickedness was not committed in secret as something to be ashamed of, nor was it the product of a spontaneous outburst of the populace provoked by irresponsible elements. It was rather the law of the land, and whoever violated the savage law and performed a good deed prompted by his own instincts of pity was condemned to be burnt at the stake. There was no remedy for such a society but total destruction. You can't fix that. That's the problem. That's what it comes down to, is this. If it's a law, if it's so popular that everybody votes that into becoming the law of the land, you can't fix that. You have to destroy it. That's the only thing you can do. The second concept illustrated by the Midrash is that the catastrophe that overtook Sodom was a direct result of their encompassing the death of a certain young woman for feeding a poor man. it was this one deed, this cry, that weighed the scales against them. She quotes the Rambam in the Hilchot Teshuvah because it's remember, it's an important idea to remember. We've mentioned this before. We mentioned it this year before Rosh Hashanah, that just like we have to envision ourselves as if we're one mitzvah, one avera away from tipping the scales into the good book or the bad book, we also have to imagine that the same is true for the whole world, for the whole city. And all cities are judged the same way. The world is judged the same way. Right? Just as each individual is endowed with his own unique personality and has no exact counterpart, right? We're all unique. Nobody has the same fingerprints as you ever. Nobody in the whole history of the world, billions and trillions of people, nobody has ever been the same exactly as you. So every deed committed in the world makes its own particular contribution, positive or negative, to the general welfare, ultimately affecting the fate of the whole of mankind. Man, and I love this line, man is no speck of dust or cog in a machine, but is created in the image of God, responsible for his every action to himself, society, and the world. We're not nothing. No matter what you hear on the news or social media, nobody cares, nobody knows, your vote wasn't counted. It doesn't matter. We have endless, infinite power that we're just not even tapping into. For instance, it was the cry of that young woman cruelly put to death which weighed the scales against Sodom and sealed its fate. The entire city is wiped out because of one girl. One girl. She says more. She quotes Rabbi Yitzchak Arama in the Akeida Yitzchak. Some other very important ideas about how the people just didn't care. They were apathetic. They had plenty of wealth, plenty of everything, and yet that wasn't enough for them. They had to make sure that nobody else got. And this is why Lot went there to begin with, because he wanted a wealthy place to live. And really, the only part of the story that made him seem like a good guy is that he ended up breaking the law of Sodom and bringing the people, these angels, into his house. Whether he knew they were angels or not is a whole different topic. All right. I like this last quote she gives from Yeshayahu, chapter 5, verse 12. Vaya kinu v'nevel tofa chalil v'yayin mishtehem. They have the harp and the different instruments and the pipe and the wine. All of this are in their mishtehem, are all at their parties. Ve'et pol Hashem lo yabitu ma'aseh yadav lo ra'u. But they don't respect the work of Hashem, and they don't realize that everything is in his hands. Right? So that was their mistake. That's they have everything. They're set, but they don't realize that everything can fall in an instant because of their terrible behavior. Okay, two more comments. One more on this verse, and then we'll skip right down to the akeida. Interesting language. What do we say? Hashem says he's going to investigate what's going on. All right. I'm going to go down and I'm going to see. Hashem needs to go somewhere. Hashem needs to see something. He's all knowing. He's all powerful. He is everywhere. What does it mean he has to go down and see? Powerful idea you're going to hear right now. Something I've emphasized before, but his wording is very powerful. He says, "Ki kasher Hashem itbarach nitkar levirot ma'aseh bnei Adam." What happens when Hashem wants to get close to seeing the workings of people? Netosef kedusha ba'aretz. What it really means is him coming down means he's bringing kedusha down. Holiness is now going to wrap up the people he's investigating, the people he's exploring, right? These people are now going to feel the Shekhinah more. Umimela, what should happen? Mitkarvim b'nei Adam l'Hashem yitbarach. What should happen when you feel inspired? You should become holier. You should be doing teshuvah. I don't know if you know this, but historically, we often like to think that, it used to be a much more religious time, and then little by little, things have been chipped away at religion, at morality, at ethics, and now we're left with what we have now. What you have to understand, just because it's a historical fact, is that it's not one straight line. There have been a lot of cycles. There have been more religious times than now. There have been less religious times than now. There have been times when, you hear this from the progressives all the time. People who call themselves progressive, they want everybody to accept them for who they are. We can live our life however we want to. We can do this, we can do that. We have all kinds of interesting flags, whatever we want to do, and everybody has to accept it. What they don't know is there was a time when that was accepted, and then there was a reaction to that. There was a reason for a reaction to that. We're not going to get into the reasons now, but there's always a reaction. People who are falling into the depths of depravity, it's not a permanent state. There has to be a reaction. Hashem will always come down and look at what's going on, and what that means is he'll inspire people to have a rebirth, to have in American history, for instance, there was what do they call it? I think they call it the Great Revival, right? There's other examples, but in the 1830s, after a time of basically hardly any religion going on, and a kind of like do whatever you want sort of attitude, especially in the western parts of the United States, whatever states there were at the time, 1830s. So some people move to places like Kentucky because they can do whatever they want, and there's no society, no community to tell them what to do. They're living in their log house; they can do whatever they want. So comes along Hashem, comes down, as it were, brings inspiration into the people, and people have a reaction to that and say, that's not good anymore. We need to fight back. We need to get closer to holiness. That's the point of what it means when Hashem says, I'm going to go down and see. I'm going to go down and inspire these people to change. And when they change, I will see it, and then I can ease up on them and not punish them. So Lezeh Amar, we need ora b'tshuva al yedei hapachad v'habusha. So people will become so scared and so embarrassed by their behavior that they're going to change. That's the intent of inspiring somebody. You see somebody who doesn't know they're being watched, right? They're doing something bad. You come up to them, just one look at you should inspire them to not be doing whatever they're doing, right? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu arda ve'ere im lo yasu teshuva ki acharei hitkarvut hazot az hichtzakata. So but what eventually happened? So he came down and he inspired people, and still there was this incident. This incident, in other words, according to the Chatam Sofer, this incident of this girl crying out happened. The Chidush Harim, sorry. The Chidush Harim, what he's saying is this incident with the girl who's being nice to this poor person, this happened after this inspiration. So maybe she got that burst of inspiration. Maybe she wanted to be good. And then the other people, the rule was what it was, and they saw her and they burnt her to death. And that crying out happened after they were supposed to be inspired. They still weren't inspired. They didn't feel any shame. They're the kind of person who's doing something inappropriate, and you come up and stare at them, and they'll continue to do what they're doing. Like, what you gonna do about it? It's like the wolf in Shrek. What? You have a problem? Did I do something wrong? So like that. So that's the situation. That's where the people were at, and of course Hashem could not abide with such a group of people surviving. He killed them all. The entire town except for Lot and his two daughters are the only survivors. And we know what ended up happening with that. And that's the survivors of Sodom, right? So and how much Lot knew about all that. We'll maybe talk about that some other time when I can feel comfortable doing it. Anyway, I can talk about it. I'm just kidding. But not today though. So that happens in the parsha. Then Avraham and Sara obviously get pregnant, have a child, and his name is Yitzchak. He gets a brit milah. Yishmael is not treating him nicely. He gets kicked out together with Hagar, and eventually, at the end of the parsha, Avraham has his major test. According to most opinions, this is the 10th of the 10 tests of Avraham. So major, so difficult that it is the creme de la creme. This test is going to prove who Avraham is. Question is why? So let's look at the verse real quick, and then we'll look at a Michtav Eliyahu of Eliyahu Dessler. We're probably not going to, no, we definitely don't have time to read the whole thing. It's a 2-page essay, but we'll definitely summarize some parts here. But he after all these things, Elohim nisat Avram, Hashem tested Avram. Here, it's very clear that this is a nisa, a nisayon. This is definitely a test of Avram. It's the only one of the tests that's literally called a test. Right? So this is the test of Avraham. Vayomer elav Avram, vayomer hineni, he says to Avram, it says, here I am. So then he's told to take his beloved Yitzchak up to Har HaMoriah, and what happens, as we talked about before. Says Rav Eliyahu Dessler in this essay. This is in, I believe this is in volume 2 of Michtav Eliyahu, page 190 and 191, if you want to look it up. So there, you have to realize the importance, the greatness of this test by looking at the three perspectives, 3 things that made this test absolutely, virtually impossible for almost anybody else. This is the real test of Avraham. Rishon, pashtut, simply, godel misirat nefesh, the misirat nefesh, the sacrifice that Avraham had to give up from all of the things that he had accomplished his entire life. In other words, as we said before, what has Avraham accomplished? Last week's parsha, the Midrash tells us he broke Terach's idols. We know he preached monotheism. He did chesed left and right. He jumped out of the tent, no matter how much pain he had, to get some nomads to come to his tent and eat his food. He preached on and on and on about idolatry and how it's ridiculous. Now, this God that he's been putting up on a pedestal, almost literally, is telling him to kill his own child. All of the kiruv that he'd accomplished, all of the people he'd brought close to God right now, are basically saying, okay, see ya. That's not for us. Nice religion. It was all good. I was even okay with the Brit Milah part. Now you're killing your own son. That's not for me. Forget about it. He lost. He could have lost all credibility, completely. The whole religion of Judaism down the tubes, all because of this possible misunderstanding of what he's supposed to do. So that's Rishon. That's the first thing. Secondly, Hashem himself, as I said before today, promised Avraham in last week's parsha, through an angel promised Sara in this week's parsha, that they would have a child, and that child would continue the legacy of Avraham. Continue the legacy of Avraham for 37 years? That's how old Yitzchak is during the akeida. That's it? That's the end of the legacy? It's all gone? Everything we built up, that whole legacy is this? It's over? So yeah, that's the test. And thirdly, And this cannot be, I cannot emphasize this enough. Thirdly, you have to understand how much Avraham loved Yitzchak. The first time in the entire Torah that the word ahava is used, that love is used, is in reference to the love of Avraham to Yitzchak. It is the greatest love. This is the son that Avraham has been waiting for his entire life. He's 100 years old when he has this son, 101 to be exact. He's 101 years old when he has this son. He's been with him day in and day out without any vacation for 37 years. He loves this guy. This is the strongest possible love, and he has to kill him. That's how impossible this test was. To understand a little bit about how impossible this test was, we have this entry from Miktav Meliahu, and what happens? Avraham passes this test. Avraham has the faith in Hashem to go through all of this and to still go and take his beloved son that's going to throw away all of his life's work and all of his future descendants, all going to be wiped out with this one cut, and he's going to do it because Hashem told him to, or that's how he understands it. That's amazing. And that's the test of the akeida. That's why this is the premier test of Avraham. That's why this test is the only one that's called a nisayon, a test. Right. So that's what we have for tonight's class. I'm going to, again, a quick reminder before I stop the recording, or while I'm stopping the recording and the live to Facebook. Next week's class is going to be Tuesday night. If you can't make it, I understand. I have a previous engagement Wednesday night, and I still want to give a class. So that's going to be Tuesday night. So Monday night class and a Tuesday night class next week. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Good week too.
Thank you.
Thank you.